Hello.
Hello, check. Check. Okay, thanks.
Hello. Welcome everyone. So Dr. Satyanarayana is not available today, so I'm taking his job just to introduce the speaker today. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce today's special asset colloquium speaker, Dr. Anirban Dattya. Anirban is a director and the head of model risk governance and framework for DWS, which is the asset management arm of the Deutsche Bank. So before joining DWS, Anirban was a director in the model risk management function of Credit Suisse for over 6 years. He led the validation book of work of several modeling disciplines, including economic capital, stress testing, liquidity, CFO, funding and valuation in resolution, and recovery and resolution planning. Most recently, he was responsible for the model risk component of firm-wide large regulatory stress testing programs like loss potential analysis or LPA and internal capital adequacy assessment process, ICAAP, and overlay governance. Prior to joining the Credit Suisse, Anirban was responsible for the end-to-end product development and delivery of 2 financial technology startups in the areas of hedge fund investor services and smart data ingress and reporting engines. Now, Anirban comes from an academic background. Anirban has a PhD in mathematics from Western Michigan University. He has a master's in mathematics from the Stony Brook University and a MStat with specialization in probability from Indian Statistical Institute and a BStat with honors from Indian Statistical Institute as well. Also, Anirban was a VSRP in the summer of 2000 here in TIFR, so he knows TIFR very well. One important point is that the DWS group is in the process of building a team in India, and Anirban is heading that mission. Okay? So Anirban has kindly agreed to have an interaction with students right after the colloquium. So for the students who are interested, I request you to stay back for that discussions following just after the talk. Okay? So with that, I request Anirban to begin his.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tridip. It was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time. So, as Tridip mentioned, TFR is one of the fondest memories of my student life when I was, a bachelor student and then master's back in Kolkata. And if I had studied with the same intensity that I did during my VSRP 2 months, I probably would have been doing something, much more meaningful than what I'm today. But it was really an amazing 2 months. And it's always a pleasure to come back to TFR. Great minds are here. I will not talk about complex mathematics. You are the experts of it. I will talk about something very simple and mostly at the philosophical level, and things that we often do not pay attention to when we are in the thick of details. And let's focus on the first two words of the title, model risk. I will talk about what is a model and what is risk. I will go in the reverse order, but let's talk about those first. And then I will see how we are combining them and what are the challenges arising in that area. And I don't want to talk about a lot of stuff on the slide. Let us make it an interactive session. So please feel free to stop me and ask me anything. I'll try to do my best to answer. So the first thing is risk. What, how, and how much. So what is risk? It's the possibility of a bad outcome. I'm not saying it's a bad outcome itself. It's just the possibility of it. So there's a very careful distinction I'm making there. And risk is part of existence. No matter what we do, it is associated with risk. The fact that I came from Pune to here in the morning, I have taken some risk. I travel in a car, in a highway, anything can happen, right? But I have chosen to accept that risk. It's within my risk appetite. And these are the key concepts of risk management that we all exercise every day in our lives, right? Suppose you are going from here to Goa in a weekend. You take some cash with you. You have some of your bank cards, right? There's still risk. The system could be down. You could be stuck. You can run out of cash. But we take a calculated risk, no matter what we do or not do in our everyday life at every step. So when it comes to the financial industry, what are the sources of risk that we are concerned with? We are concerned with stuff like market risk. Market risk is when prices go up and down in the market. Credit risk, when a bank loans money to someone and that person cannot pay back. That's a credit risk. Operational risk. Operational risk could be someone is doing a bad faith trading, something going wrong, some control breaking, or even an operational risk could be, and it was a real risk during, for example, Hurricane Sandy back in New York. Some of the data centers became unoperational. So some of the offices could not be used. Even when COVID started 4 years ago, it did pose an operational risk to all the organizations. We could not go to office. So we had to mitigate how we are going to deal with that situation. These are all risks and climate risk. So this hurricane that we talked about is also an example of a climate risk manifesting itself, right? Now, none of these are necessarily, mutually exclusive. These are just, conventions to mark something as market or credit or operational for the sake of simplicity. And you can always argue whether this risk is it really market risk or is it really credit risk? But that's not the point. These are some of the sources that we commonly see. Now, how do we measure how much risk we are taking? Because risk is a possibility that will happen in the future, not known today. So the operating assumption here is we don't know the future, which means we have to estimate. And the moment you say estimate, you are using a model because you are doing something uncertain. You are making an approximation. You are making a guess. Maybe a sophisticated guess, maybe a not so sophisticated guess, but it's a guess nonetheless. So we try to measure risk, and there are multiple approaches. So depends on how you want to measure risk. In financial industry, there are multiple ways. So for example, one of the risk is called VAR. So VAR is short form for value at risk. What people are doing, they're trying to measure a short-term risk percentile, how much money I can lose at a given percentile, or I cannot lose beyond that with certain probability in the next 1 day, 10 day, depending on what horizon VAR you're computing. Then there are longer term, like economic capital models, where people try to estimate the same kind of percentile, but now for a 1 year time horizon and with a much higher percentile. So sometimes people do a 99 percentile economic capital for a 1 year, and sometimes 99.9. Every organization has their own preference and reason to do so. And then we do pricing models, and we estimate prices of things. We estimate prices now, and we estimate prices in the future as well. The one is say now. Now let's talk about the concept of price. Let me ask the question: what is price? Okay, value is another word, but what is it? Okay, let's take a concrete example. Let's say this bottle of water. What is the price of it? Exactly. So suppose I bought this for 5, right? So I bought it for 5 because I thought I'm getting more than 5 rupees worth of whatever it is, right? And the person sold because he thought he's getting a good price. So the trade happened because two people actually disagreed inherently on the price. If we both agree that it's the same thing, why do I change? It's having the same thing. If we both agree, so if you have a 5 rupee note, I have a 5 rupee note, we're not going to do exchanging. It's the same thing. We only exchange when there is a difference in perception. So there is no absolute price. When people say price of something, when you say, suppose you have a house in Colaba, and you say its price is whatever, $5 million. What does it mean? Usually it means you have estimated by seeing at what price similar houses were sold in the nearby area, and you come up with a price. If you go to sell that price, you may or may not get that. You may get more, you may get less. That's the observed price. So when you see in the market they're quoting the stock price, what they're quoting is the last observed transaction price. Doesn't mean if you go to the market, you're going to be able to buy or sell at that price. And if you actually go to the market to buy, let's say, any stock or gold, anything that's liquid, right? You will see people are quoting two different prices. They're quoting a buy price and a sell price. No one is willing to buy and sell at the same price in the market. If you buy a kilogram of gold, and if you go back and try to return it immediately, you're not going to get the same price back. So it's important to understand what is the use of it, what we are exactly talking about when trying to model. That's what I'm trying to get at. Nothing is always absolute just from the face of it. So even for price, even at present, not a future price, there are different interpretations, and you have to be careful what you want to do with it. Your price depends on that, how you want to use that price. If you want to calculate someone's net worth, you're probably going to use a price. So coming back to the house example, if you just own the house in Colaba and nothing else, you want to estimate your net worth, you will probably use that approximate price, right? Estimated price. But if you have to sell that house and use that money to buy a ship, you're not going to use that price because you're not going to get that money in the market. So depending on how quickly you have to sell it, you have to take into other considerations. So just even a simple everyday concept like price, it's important to understand the nuances. What is it going to be used for? What exactly we are trying to do? Same for risk models and pricing models. It's very important to be clear about what is it that I want to do with the model. Now, what is a model? Excuse me. It's very simple. It's an approximate representation of reality, either present or future. It's a very simple thing. What makes something a model is the presence of uncertainty, which means the moment you say or describe something which can be approximated by someone else in a different way, it can have multiple approaches, it becomes a model. Because there is, there's the question of uncertainty in it. Now, let's look at some of the models, very simple models I will do, and I will talk about why it is very important not to take models as the ultimate truth, because models have nothing to do with truth. Yes, please.
The price is dependent on how much of disagreements the consumer and the seller has.
No, price doesn't depend, because there is a disagreement in the perception of price, there is a trade.
Deciding what prices, it's also an important factor whether the consumer really needs that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Depending on how much need I have and how much willing I am ready to.
Absolutely, yes.
So in that defining the price, that you have to also
include. You have to, because that will, that will create the perception which we're quantifying as price at the end, right? If you, for example, if you want to buy a house in Colaba, it really depends. If you really are a house in Colaba, or do you really need a house? Or do you really have to be in Colaba? So all those factors come in, right? Now, from the seller's perspective, you are not the only potential customer. There are a whole population. Their aggregate perception will, in a way, guide what he or she can charge as the selling price. So there are multiple perceptions in place, and there is also a difference in information based on which you are arriving at the price. So, for example, suppose you and I are going to buy the same price, same house, right? And you know from the previous tenant, somehow your friend, right, that there is some serious structural damage in the house which I'm not privy to. You'll be pricing it at a much lower value than I will without having the information. So not only your need, your information base also comes into picture. However, in most of the pricing theory, people assume everyone knows everything, complete knowledge. So that's one of the things. I'll talk about that when it comes to the Black-Scholes in a bit. So, okay, Lotka-Volterra model. It's a population dynamics model. So suppose you have two populations in a confined space, one prey, one predator, let's say rabbits and foxes, something like that. You have this beautiful two sets of equation when you are trying to model that, right? So X and Y represent the population density. So you have a fixed area, so population density. Now, my question is, does it even make sense mathematically? Anyone sees any problem with this model?
It would predict that it's not there, but it's still the
right. But even mathematically, if I have a fixed area, what is X? X is number of members of certain species divided by that area, right? It is a discretely valued function. It's not even continuous, and we are assuming it's differentiable. It's a huge leap of faith. For me, as a mathematician, this gives me horrors, right? Because you are taking a function which is discretely valued, it's a step function of time, and you are doing derivatives of it. So, in a given area, right? So your denominator is fixed. So the numerator can only have integer values. So no matter what you do, it's a step function of time. It's an ideal situation. Exactly. It can never hold true mathematically. Much finite, right? Now, the question is, should I discard this model? The answer is nuanced. It depends on what you want to do. If you want to really do like a rabbit fox population where there are hundreds of thousands of rabbits in a 10 square kilometer area, you're probably okay. Because you are really, very, closely chopping off your intervals, you're probably fine. But if you're trying to do the same thing with a number of elephants and how much banana trees are there in 2 square kilometer area, you'll be horribly wrong. I mean, there are probably only 10 elephants, right? And you are doing a very sophisticated differential equation on top of it. Same thing, if you're trying to measure the whale population, there are probably only handful of whales and they're very far apart. If one dies, it dies, and it's not that. So it's important to make sure what you are trying to do with it. Just because it makes sense and has a sophisticated mathematics, it has no bearing on whether it can or cannot be used in reality. So we have to be, and there are, you can read up, there are glorious misapplications of looked-up algebra that happen when people actually try to do model populations of large mammals, which are few and far apart. Now, we just talked about it. Let's look at another historical classical debate. So Darwin, when he was postulating and formulating his theory of evolution after collecting data for half a decade, he observed how slow the process of evolution is. And he arrived at a very crude qualitative calculation, which led him to conclude that for his theory to work, to even make sense, the Earth has to be at least 300 million years old. Anything younger than that, theory of evolution would not work. However, at the same time, there was another gentleman, Lord Kelvin, who used sophisticated theories of thermodynamics and said the Earth is at most 30 million years old. And there was a huge debate, and Kelvin himself and a lot of people who agreed with Kelvin, they said, this second one has very fancy mathematics and has physics in it. Darwin had nothing. He had just real observations and some very rudimentary back of the envelope calculation. And it actually drove Darwin into severe frustration that this huge difference. So Kelvin capped it at 30 million, and he said, I need a floor at 300 million for my theory to work. Now we all know both of them were incorrect, but Darwin was closer because he had a floor. He didn't say, it's exactly 300 or something like that. So where did Kelvin go wrong? Is physics wrong? That's not what we're saying. It's the assumptions that he made. He made, number of assumptions. One of the key assumptions, he said, so there is no other heat source. Earth started with some temperature and then started to cool off. There was no heat coming into it, which is incorrect. Now we know there are radioactive elements in the core which give off heat, and that's what's throwing this calculation away. So it's very important what we assume. We need to understand when we try to apply something in reality, models are only cartoon representations. Similarly, another fabled famous equation, Black-Scholes. So what is Black-Scholes? Suppose I have a stock. Does everyone know what is a stock? If not, I can explain in 30 seconds. It's something very simple. So, okay. So stock is ownership of a proportion of a company. So if a company has 1 million stocks issued and you have one, you mean you are owner of 1 millionth of that company. That's exactly what it is. Now, let's talk about something called a call option. What is a call option? And we're talking about what's called a European plain vanilla call option. It has three things. Listen very carefully. First one is an underlying stock. Let's assume the stock is the stock of Microsoft. I don't know what the price of Microsoft is today, but let's say the stock price is something. And a time T and a strike price K. Let's say the time T is end of February and strike price is 100. I'll explain a bit. And let's assume I hold the call option and Tridib sold me the call option, which is based on a Microsoft stock maturing end of February with a strike price 100, which means at end of February, I have the right, but no obligation to buy one share of Microsoft from Tridib at 100, no matter what the price of that is in the market. If it's 150, I will buy it from him at 100 and he will sell back at 150. I make 50 profit, right? If it's 98, I'm not going to exercise my option, because why I'm going to buy something I can get in the market for 98 for one. So I have no obligation, but I have the right. Now, this right cannot be free. I need to pay something to him today, so that he sells me this right? Now, so mathematically, the payoff at time T is ST minus K plus the positive part of it, right? Because if it's more, you make the profit. If it's ST is lower, you get zero. It's a very simple representation. But the billion-dollar question is, what should I pay for it today? That's where Black-Scholes came in. They assume that this ST, small t, follows a geometric ground in motion process with a factor sigma of volatility and a drift mu, and then they did some really fancy stochastic PDE using Ito's lemma, which is nothing but the change of variable formula for non-differentiable functions like ground in motion, and they came up with a price, right? They published this in the Journal of Political Economy in 1973, if I'm not mistaken, and they got a Nobel Prize. Well, Black passed away. Scholes and Martin got a Nobel Prize in 1997. Now let's assume, let's see what it takes for that formula. I didn't write the expression down. You can find it anywhere on the internet. That's not the point. What are the assumptions that goes in? First of all, you're saying that the stock follows geometric ground in motion. Here are two major issues with that. You cannot have a sub-penny price. You cannot have a price of a stock. It's in an exchange which is 38.238962. We'll have some dollars, some cents. That's it. So the domain of your stock price is not even continuous. It's a discrete domain. You don't have a price observed. No matter how quickly people are trading, you cannot observe the price at every time point, right? You can only observe the price when someone is trading. And the more illiquid the stock is, the fewer the observations. And if you think that is crazy, here is another assumption you need for that price to work. You can trade continuously and without any cost. No matter how quickly you trade, no matter what powerful supercomputer had, what are you going to do? You're going to trade every nanosecond, every femtosecond, or picosecond, whatever fancy, sophisticated small measure of time we have. It's still as far from continuity as trading every year. Infinity doesn't care. And without any cost. Have you ever seen anything that happens in this world without a cost? And this is probably one of the most benign. You are assuming that the volatility is constant for the process. Here is another thing that you need for the price to work. You can borrow anything at the risk. So risk-free rate is you can assume is the government published interest rate. You can borrow any amount at that risk-free rate as you wish. I mean, I'm sure most of us will have a problem to borrow even $1 at that risk-free rate if I go to a bank today. They will always charge a markup on that. And depending on the credit history thing, and it will go up, right? You cannot even have a credit card, whose limit is not associated with your income and all that stuff, right? And here you are talking about borrowing money at the risk-free rate at any amount. Because volatility is, I mean, if you look at a small time horizon, it's still probably, you can see it's not varying that much, right? But these other ones are mathematically impossible to even happen. And you need all of this to work in unison to make that pricing. There are other assumptions as well. I'm not going into it. I mean, if you actually have a process which is following some sort of geometric Brownian motion, volatility, and that one you can very easily mitigate, in the sense there are models where you can introduce a time sensitive volatility and other variable volatility, and you can still do stuff. But the other ones are beyond our control. That's why I'm saying that probably is the least of the worries, because that's a mathematical challenge we can easily overcome, and people have.
If the stock prices are the same, then this small finance limitations of the able to process.
Very good question. See, what kind of function we are assuming? We are assuming a geometric Brownian motion, which are nowhere differentiable. It's extremely wiggly. So it's a function of infinite variation. It's not a well-behaved function where I can just narrow the interval and approximate it well, right? That's where the problem comes in with this, because this is not a differentiable function. This is a nowhere differentiable function with probability 1. So if an extremely wiggly function with infinite variation, right? So you cannot approximate, no matter how close you are. It's almost like a fractal-like structure there, right? You will be as far away from it, no matter how fine your approximations are. That's where the problem comes. Yeah. Yeah, have memories. People have memories, and then there are other assumptions I was mentioning here. It assumes complete knowledge. So suppose all the participants of the market knows everything. Not just that. I know that you know everything, and you know that I know everything. I know that you know that I know everything, and this whole tower of knowledge is this ad infinitum is considered as an assumption. So these are extremely difficult assumptions to hold in reality. And I will not talk about it now, but you should go and just look up in the Google, right? Before Black and Scholes published their paper in 1973, they actually attempted to trade using this kind of pricing. You may want to read what happened there. And in 98, just the year after Scholes and Martin got the Nobel Prize, you may want to see what happened to their hedge fund called LTCM, Long-Term Capital Management. These are interesting historical reads. However, sorry, 1 second. So we just talked about none of them hold. So now let's talk about what kind of models we use in a financial institution, right? We use pricing models, risk models, liquidity models. So liquidity, does everyone know what is liquidity? So suppose I have a car which is, let's say, valued at 5 lakhs, and I have a house which is valued at, let's say, 20 lakhs, and I have nothing in my bank account. I have 10 rupees in my pocket. I have very low liquidity, because although I own 5 lakhs and 10 rupees, if I go to the shop and want to buy a bottle of Thumbs Up, I cannot, because I don't have cash. because to actually get value out of, get money out of that, I need to sell something. So that's the concept of liquidity, how quickly you can get in and out of it. So that's a model, that's a parameter we need to estimate. Then we have trading strategies, investment strategies, what banks and asset managers and mutual funds, how they want to invest their money. Recovery and resolution planning. This is a very interesting thing. So every bank, in a way, need to plan for if they go bad, how are they going to come back? So that's your recovery and resolution. If you cannot recover, you need to resolve, you can liquidate, what path you're going to take. So those kind of things. Then you have balance sheet projections. AML is anti-money laundering. So if you want to see if any of your clients are laundering money, if there are any suspicious activities, you need to detect that. And there is no deterministic way of doing it. There's fraud detection. ESG is environmental and social governance. I mean, if we are investing in responsible, socially and environmentally responsible stuff or not. And then approach-wise, here is, I'm saying quantitative and qualitative, but take it with a pinch of salt. The qualitative is, what I really mean is it's less sophisticated. So suppose I want to estimate how much money I will have to spend, how much expense I will have in the next month to run my household. I can do a very simple calculation. I can take a look at last 12 years expense, and then I can take an average. That's one approach. It's a quantitative approach, but it's a very low sophistication, right? But there's also assumptions. Somebody could say, oh, you know, in February, we saw that you don't really go anywhere, you don't travel, so your cost will be less. You should really look at your expenses that you did in February, last February. That's another approach. Just look at last February and do it. But then someone can say, oh, but there is inflation. Maybe I need to adjust it. So these are all very simple approaches. But then you can do very sophisticated thing even for this, right? You can break up your my expenses into multiple categories, see how those prices have moved, what is expected, and you do a very sophisticated modeling. All of those you can let's say you see we consume 10 kilos of rice and 5 kilos of lentils and whatever, you can go as deep as you want, and then you do a price projection of those and then add up, and all those sophisticated things you can do. Those are quantitative approaches. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is, just because something is less sophisticated doesn't make it a bad model. The Black-Scholes we talked about, right? It's probably one of the simplest instruments in the financial world, and there you have the most sophisticated modeling. You have right now people do jump diffusion processes with local volatility and sophisticated PDEs. But if you go to complex instruments, if you go to the more complex the instrument becomes, the less sophisticated the modeling becomes. And if it's very complex, often what people will actually do, they will get 4 or 5 people in a room who have experience, and they will decide on a number if it becomes that complex. So just because it's sophisticated doesn't make it better or more useful. Often people do sophisticated things for stuff that we actually understand well, and that's one of the trends you will see, especially when it matters. Now, what can go wrong in a model? We already talked about some things. Actually, much more things can go wrong in a model, and they do. Assumptions, we already talked about it quite a bit. Limitations. Suppose I have developed a model which takes gold price data for last 15 years and predicts what the price is going to be in the next 1 year. You take the same model and use that technique on the oil price. It may not necessarily work. So, and there is another limitation, and it actually did happen. A lot of the times you assume And your model intrinsically can only work if interest rate is positive. If interest rate in the market becomes negative, and it did, you can read up on it, a lot of the models will go haywire, and they did. So there are limitations in the model in which domain it can or cannot operate. So we need to be very careful about that when using. And then another is usage. Suppose you developed a model to estimate net worth of a person, like we talked about, but you use that model to determine whether he can go on a trip to Switzerland tomorrow or not. The person may have things start up in something very liquid, right? So it's very important for what usage. So that's one of the reasons I was talking about this price, what you're going to use it for. It's very important how you price it, because you can read about a thing called prudent valuation. So when organizations and banks value their positions, in a lot of cases, they take discount on the estimated price to be prudent. And these are often based on experiences of people and doesn't have a very sophisticated mathematical framework around it. So the usage is very important, what we're going to use the model for. Why am I computing that number? Implementation. Implementation can go wrong. People can mess up a code. I was talking with Sudhir earlier, we have seen programs misfiring just because you updated the version of R, because the default setting of a library got changed and it was resulting in a $50 million difference. So those things happen. Data. You suppose you need, I'll give you an example of it. So any organization is broken into multiple business divisions, right? And they keep reorganizing these divisions, so because they want to align, change their business, strategize. So if you want to look at the data for a given business division for the last 5 years, you may not be able to do that because the division didn't exist 2 months ago, but you still need to do a model. So then you do data proxying and all those things. So all these things limit, because you developed your model assuming you have 5 years data. But when you go and collect the data, it's probably not there. So a lot of things can go wrong in a model, and they do on a regular basis. What can happen if a model goes wrong? Any idea? That's one thing, but it can actually have much more profound impact than that. So let's go back to 2007-8, that time, the subprime crisis. People were giving out money for loan to people who could not even afford the EMIs. Imagine a very simple situation. Suppose you want to buy a house whose price is 1 lakh. Let's assume that you have to pay 1,000 for EMI, and your value of your house is 1 lakh as well, right? So I as a lender give you 1 lakh, and you keep your 1 lakh mortgage, priced house as a mortgage, and you have to give 1,000 per month. Suppose you don't earn enough to pay 1,000, you can only give 900. I shouldn't be giving you the money, but people did. They said, okay, give me 9,000. I will add it to your loan principal. Why? The idea was, so next month, your loan is going to be 1 lakh and 100, because you couldn't pay the full 1,000 that you had to pay. But I was betting that the house you kept mortgage with me is now priced 1 lakh 200. So even if you don't, you're not able to give me money, I will be able to sell that house and recover. It's all fine when the real estate prices are going up, and I'm sure most of the people who are not exposed to modeling and look at data, they always believe, oh, real estate price goes up. It's a very good investment. Always the price goes up. It doesn't. And what if I gave you this loan and the price came down to 99,000 tomorrow? That's what happened. So that's a model risk. They made a faulty, horrible assumption that the house price is going to go up. It didn't. So that had an impact which was worldwide. And so I mean, of course, companies can go bankrupt, but there are much more at stake. People's lives can be impacted when these models go wrong, depending on what it is. Not every model will have that impact, but so the model risk is the risk arising out of usage of a model or a set of models. So we set out with risk models to compute risk, but if we don't use but from using the model itself, there is another risk that's coming. That's called the model risk. The question is, how do we manage them? Now, this is not something I said. This is from George Box in his paper, paper in the 1976 in the Journal of American Association. So all models are wrong. Some are useful, and this is very important. Models and reality, they have no mutual obligation to align with each other. Models are tools that help us in any discipline, any subject. Models have nothing to do with reality. It's just a cartoon description in a language that we understand and we developed. We need to be very careful of that and not confuse models with reality. Some are useful. Of course, there are useful models. Newton's law, very useful model. I'm just taking one example. So here's the thing: parsimony. And let's read what this person is saying. Since all models are wrong, scientists cannot obtain a correct one by excessive elaboration. On the contrary, I'm sure you heard of the principle called Occam's razor. We try to use, most elegant, simplistic explanation. You should seek an economical description of natural phenomena, just as the ability to devise simple and but evocative model is a signature of great scientists. Over elaboration and over parameterization is often the mark of mediocrity. It may be controversial in some context, but it's very important. Just because you have a very complex model, it's a very sophisticated model, mathematically beautiful, elegant, doesn't make it any more right than the other model that someone did by just scratching their head and taking average of 4 numbers. It has no bearing of correctness, reality, anything. It's actually more useful to have a simple model whose limitations you understand, whose weaknesses you understand, than a sophisticated model which is mathematically brilliant, but we have no idea what is going on, which is a black box to us. Selectively worrying. That's where the first thing I talked about comes in. What am I going to do about it? If I have a model which is being used for one thing, but it's demonstrating behavior which is kind of quirky in some other areas, we have to choose what exactly we care about. So it's very important not to worry about the stuff that's not important, and that depends on the usage of the model. So for example, now let me go back and talk about the Black-Scholes a little bit. If everyone in the market is using Black-Scholes model, that's what you should use to price your your position and estimate a value of how much you own, because this collective consensus is one of the important drivers of the price in the market. So that's where it is also important to align yourself with the usage and what other how it's going to be perceived. You cannot just have something completely dramatically different and then think everything is hunky-dory. It's not going to be the case. So that's why the selective worry is very important. What I'm going to do, use it for. That's what matters. Is it doing that job properly? Now, which models to use? Again, parsimony over complexity. For us, especially in the financial industry where we use a lot of models, it's very important to have well understood assumptions and limitations rather than complex things we do not understand. And as I said, sophistication does not necessarily translate to better modeling. It could be, yes, please. Yes, I'm going to talk about that. So the last point is it's also important to monitor your model. Just not develop and do an initial assessment of how good the model is. You have to have constant eye on it as it is being used. Some models are used every second, some models are used every year, and some models are used in between. So you have to have a monitoring that is commensurate with the usage and the frequency of the model. Now, how do you manage model risk? This is the stuff that we do for an individual. So there are two things, right? An organization uses somewhere between hundreds to thousands of models. So the model risk is managed at two levels, at the individual model level and at the aggregate of the framework level. At the individual level, first thing, and it might sound obvious or funny to you, the identification. It's one of the most difficult things that we face in managing model risk. To identify what are the models that are being used. Often people don't realize they're using a model. We have to actually go door to door to see and challenge to see what they do, see if there's an existence of a model. Then documentation. It's very important. Once you have a model identified, it's important to write it down in a prescribed, specified standard, so that every aspect of it is well understood. Then governance by business and SME. Here is another thing I have learned in my career. You cannot do model just for the sake of modeling. You need to understand the problem. Just because I have done a training in stochastic PD, I'm not going to go and build a model in let's say some biological or physics problem which uses stochastic PD, because I don't understand those subjects. I don't understand the problem statement. It's very important to understand the area, what you are doing, what is the problem that you're trying to address, and that does not come without the training in that area. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal training or a degree, but you need to spend time to understand that area. It cannot be modeling for the sake of modeling. You cannot start, suppose S is a stochastic process with blah, blah, blah. You cannot do that. You need to understand what S is in reality. Then that's what this governance by business and SME is subject matter expert. So after you develop a model document, you need to get it challenged by people who are experts in that area. Then it comes to the model risk management function where we do risk tiering. We do an assessment how risky it is. So we look at several aspects of it. We look at reliance, complexity of model, how operationally challenging it is, what is the materiality of it, and all these aspects give rise to a tiering. Every organization does it in a different way. Somebody does one tier 1 to 3, somebody does 1 to 3, 4, 1 to 3, 4, 5. Everyone has their own way. That tells us how much rigor to put, how strong of a standard to put on the risk management of that particular model. After that comes the full validation. So where people take apart the whole model, right? Then ongoing performance, I already talked about it. Then comes overlay. This is a very interesting thing. After all these things, after developing, getting is assessed by experts and model risk, when you actually run the model, you will still see that you don't like the results or it doesn't match with your intuition. Then on the fly, you have to tweak the thing, and that's a very risky maneuver, but everyone does that. It's called overlays. You change the model output. And so that needs to have its own governance and stuff. Overlays is something So suppose you have to use the number tomorrow. Today, you find a number, let's say, 200 million, but you don't like it. You really think for some reason, you as in what the business users, it should be 250. That also needs to have some sort of model risk governance in place. So then you have periodic reviews you kick the tires to see it's working, and every now and then you do a revalidation again, depending on the tier, and then you do the change management if you change the model. So that's at the individual model level, how you do it. At the aggregate level, what we do, we start with the regulatory directives. Now, a multinational organization will have regulatory directive from multiple governments. We try to form a common minimum view so that there's not a whole lot of disparity among standards, but there still are sometimes. Then you come up with a policy and framework. There's an independent model risk management function. Independence is key here. People who are managing model risk should be able to criticize and judge the model without any interference from the people who develop the model or are going to be using the model. It has to be a completely independent operation. There are policy, operating procedures, and templates, how you document things and stuff. Then you develop what's called key risk indicators. You develop some rudimentary measures, very simple measures. How many models are there? How was the validation results? How many bad findings were there? So on and so forth. Those are called key risk indicators, and you set up what's called a risk appetite. You say that this risk indicator, I want to be within this limit or that limit. That is set at the farm level, and then you keep monitoring it every month or every week, depending on, or every quarter, depending on the need. So that's how you manage model risk at the framework level. So you set up the framework, and then you allocate it down to this. Sorry, not allocate. So you apply it down to each individual models. Okay, so that's how a model risk management function works. And for both doing it at the aggregate level and at the individual level, you need a lot of quantitative and business understanding, because when you are tearing apart a model, let's say it does a very sophisticated stochastic PD modeling, you need to know what is a stochastic PD, how to solve it, how to challenge it. And on the other hand, when you're doing the framework, you need to have seen enough number of models and in detail across the board to form a big picture in your mind where you can develop a policy which actually takes care of how all these individual models are going to be managed. Now, I will end with a thought which I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that question, because there's an inherent problem to that. How do you quantify model risk? Because the model you try to quantify the model risk, you are trying to use another model, and that is adding to the problem. So quantification of model risk is a challenge. So think about how we can quantify. Any questions? Thank you.
Yeah. Illuminating into the financial world, things and functions. So we are open for any questions that you have.
So I just wanted to know, like, the process of transitioning from, say, an academic background, for example, in your case, that's a PhD in mathematics, to finance. Like, what are the prerequisites? What do you need to know? What must be done?
So
additions and all that.
it depends on the kind of function in an organization you would like to be. But if you are a fresh PhD, most sensible organization will take you on the basis of your understanding of what you have studied so far. If you are a PhD, I can talk about how I interview someone. If you're a PhD in mathematics, I'm not going to question you how to price a Bermudan swaption. I'm going to try to question you in the topics that you have studied. Or if you're a PhD in physics, I will try to get someone who is a PhD in physics and to challenge you in your area. so that we understand your fundamental training is there. After that, once you join, we will give you training materials to see, and you will learn a lot on the job. But however, if you're joining laterally, then we would expect to have some, sort of background. Because if you're joining after, suppose you worked in another organization and then joining, right? Then I'm going to judge you based on what you've done as well, not just your training. But model risk is slightly interesting in that aspect, because since we have to look at a lot of models, what we look at first, especially in a fresh candidate, is their quantitative abilities. Do you really understand basics of mathematics? That's what will matter. That's how we're going to challenge. Do you know how to postulate a problem and challenge it? Do you know how to write up? I didn't talk about that in my talk, of course, but it's very important to know how to communicate. Succinct communication is key, and I at least expect a PhD student to know how to express clearly their findings. Or that it should not be a long essay, rambling, going from topic A to topic B. It should be very clear. What is the fact? What are the assumptions you made? What is the argument? What is the deduction? So that skill is important as well. And after that, you will learn a lot on the job. It's not easy, but nothing is, right. You will learn new terms, and again, not everyone will know every aspect of banking even after 10, 20 years, right? So you'll have to find your own area of expertise once you join that organization, and most organizations will give you that exposure. They will rotate you between subject areas, and we'll try to see where you fit the most. However, nonetheless, it's a business. Your interest cannot be the only parameter. It's also important what needs to get done at that point, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It's not going to be just because you want to do let's say Bermudan swaptions, you will be in that team. It's not going to be that. But people do try to accommodate.
So I wanted to know that you said that adding details always may not work in a model, but this is what...
No, elaboration. I'm not saying adding details. You need to be very careful about details and elaboration. Suppose you start with a process saying, oh, suppose it's a Brownian motion. That's one. Then next step you said, oh, so suppose it's a geometric Brownian motion. Next step is suppose it's a geometric Brownian with local dynamic volatility. Then you say suppose it's a jump division process with two regimes. That may not always work, just because you're over elaborating the modeling process. But I'm not saying that details as in suppose X is a random variable to X is a normal distribution with blah blah blah. That detail has to be there. So it's elaboration, not detail.
So by elaboration, you mean that it might not be a Brownian motion at all?
At all, and you were just adding more complex variations of Brownian motion is not necessarily a step towards the right direction.
Yeah. So suppose you have a model and you know that this is not working in a particular way you expected. So what do you first do? You discard it and look for other models, or you try to first add some elaborations, details? Or...
It's a very good question. From where I stand in my role, the first thing will be to raise an alarm. There could be two cases. The model is already in use, and I found a serious problem with it. And number two, the model is not in use. If it's not in use, it's often an easier problem. You just tell, oh, go develop again. It doesn't work. Or you identify the problems, you tell people who develop to fix it. If it's a model that's already in action, in most cases, you will not have the luxury to stop the model, because you need something. So for example, it calculates your daily VAR. If you come up with an issue, you're not going to be able to stop it. It's a regulatory number. You have to report those numbers to everyone, even the governments every day, right? So you do what is called an overlay at that point. That's one thing. You take an approach, you tweak the numbers in a conservative way to the extent possible. And you take the time to redevelop or fix the problem in the model. If the problem is not that bad, you may just want to keep monitoring. See, and you can even want to set thresholds, beyond which you're going to start screaming and start doing something about it. So that's one thing you do. And whether to fix the problem or scrap it, it depends on the situation, how much problem there is, and whether it's a systemic problem or just a one-time issue that happened, and how much money you have to redevelop the model, because developing costs money, a lot of money. So those considerations will come into picture. But yeah, that's how we usually do it on the fly.
You were mentioning about the assumption of like a continuous trading and that being a bad assumption. So typically, we take these assumptions and they are either right or wrong, depending on what regime you're operating in. So, like, for example, it may be continuous with respect to some time scale of some other process which is happening in the model. So,
No. So what this model assumes, suppose you have a portfolio. The portfolio, in this case, they will consider a portfolio of stock, option, and cash, right? Let's say PT, the portfolio at time t is, let's say sigma t, which is how much stock you own, and let's say OT, which is how much option, and CT, how much cash. They assume this is a continuous function. You cannot achieve that in reality, no matter what you do. And they assume it changes over time. It changes continuously at every time point. So that is something you cannot achieve. So it's always wrong, that assumption.
but is it more wrong or more or less wrong depending on some
Depending
scale?
on what you want to do with it. No, not scale, right? Because as I was mentioning because the function you are trying to chase, it's a function which is non-differentiable everywhere. So it's not a finite variation function, right? So just because you are doing very frequently, it's not getting any closer to that, to approximating that function. If you had a well-behaved smooth function, boundary variation, it's fine. You can live with it. So, for example, the Lotka-Volterra model, right? That's a nice differential function, but the Brownian motion is horribly wiggly, right? It's nowhere differentiable with priority one. So no matter how fine an interval you take, you are as far from it. That's what is making that a bad assumption. But again, the question is what you want to do with it. If you really want to follow that price and trade, you have to be careful to do how you manage your risk, because that model will tell you if the market price do not agree with your model price, you go all in. You borrow as much money as you want and you follow your model. But if you do that, you can guess what's going to happen in reality. So that's how we manage. So I'm not saying that the model should not be used. I'm saying it should be used with a pinch of salt, and with a large pinch of salt, how you manage your positions and how you safeguard against wrong moves. If you tone down the Black-Scholes modeling to a very simple case, right? The most simplistic. Suppose there are two time points, not even continuum. Two time points, T0 and T1. At T, suppose the price is S0 now. The price can be, let's say, S1 or S2 at time T1. Only two values. Let's say your value is 100 now, and the price can be either 110 at time point 1 or 98. Only two possibilities. Very simple world. And you can do the Black-Scholes pricing in that case as well, right? And if the market price do not agree with it, you should go all in. You should buy or sell the stock depending on which direction it is. With all the money you have, you should borrow and invest everything. You should leverage it in an infinite way. However, you can show if that S1 and S2 gets perturbed a little bit, your win-win can turn into lose-lose. It's that unstable. Even, and I'm talking about a very simple two-step stochastic process with two outcomes. If you take that Black-Scholes pricing and bring it down to this very, very simple cartoonish thing, you can show just a little change in the model can make your win-win to lose-lose. So if that's what you have to be careful about.
Hello. Yeah, my question is, if someone wants to join a financial institution like as yourself, so like for the students in IIT and IISER, they have the option of campus placements and all those. But like for our case, who are in PhD enrollment and something, so if they want to appear for the interview, so what are the gateways to do that? And
So I can talk about my organization. You can go to the website. The jobs are already published, and I do encourage you to apply. If I can give you the contact afterwards of the HR who can help you with that. Okay. So, and I can also point it to if you go to the Deutsche Bank career website, you should be able to see your jobs posted, and you should see positions listed in Bombay, Pune, and Bangalore.
And my second question is that so as he was talking about and also what you also did, you joined as a fresh PhD as a.
So after my PhD, I did after PhD, I didn't do model risk. I did financial tech. However, in my PhD, I did know the term model risk, but I did look at what happens to models when you perturb them, and what kind of stability happens. Stability issues are there when you perturb a model. That helped me a little bit down the road, but it doesn't really matter. I will tell you, most of the people I worked with as my managers in my tenure in the banking industry, they came from an academic background and then joined a financial institution, and they learned on the job. So my first manager in Credit Suisse, he was a PhD in category theory. Then my last manager in Credit Suisse, he was a PhD in function analysis. My manager now, and she is a PhD in physics from Max Planck. So, and they joined right after their PhD, so they learned on the job. And you will see, especially in model risk, you will see a lot of people with academic background, especially backgrounds from physics, mathematics, and engineering, and statistics, of course, and economics.
My question is that, so it is common from people in PhD in different background to join a financial institution. So my question is it also common for people with postdoc in a different background and join a financial institution, or?
There are examples. I will say it's less common, but it's less common not because we don't want to hire postdocs. It's less common because postdocs have already taken a stride towards spending their life in academics. It's because of their preference and not our preference.
Right.
However, there will be another aspect. Even after postdoc, when you join, you will be joining at a relatively lower seniority. If you had joined after PhD, and in 5 years you will be at a certain seniority given how you perform, blah blah. If you do a 5-year postdoc, chances are you will not be joining at the same seniority, because when you take the seniority in our organizations, type of organizations, they give you couple of things, right? The experience in that industry, understanding how that organization works itself. All these things matter from a senior person, right? So yeah, you will have that disadvantage if you're joining as a postdoc, to be very honest. But we would not hold it against someone. But we're not going to offer the same seniority. We'll offer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and third question was that, so you said that at some point the interest rate was negative. So we're talking about the bank interest rate, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Swiss interest rate was negative for a while.
Thank you.
We'll take questions there on. So, Siddharth Karmakar, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question, go ahead. Otherwise, I will read the question.
Hi, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, so I had hi, thanks firstly for this nice talk. And actually, I had a technical question in some sense that
I would, sorry, Siddharth, I would rather not answer that question because that is a technical question, and I should not be talking about how to, model something in a particular thing. It will have some issues from, but this is a known problem for a dividend paying stock. You should be able to find enough materials online for that. And interest rate fluctuation is important because it does depend. It kind of what is interest rate? Interest rate is how much money you can get without taking excessive risk. So if you're getting already, let's say 10%, you are not going to invest in a stock which is not probably going to give you that much of return, and you are taking excessive risk. So that will drive the demand of the stock down and will impact negatively. So it's the impact is there.
Any more question from the online Zoom? Okay, if not, let's thank the speaker once again for very informative. So this is where we conclude the asset colloquium. Yes.
So as a token of appreciation for a wonderful talk which you came and present here, it is a perspective of asset. Yeah,
Thank you.
I guess.
Thank you so much.
And of course, you must have enjoyed the artwork.
Yes,
that you have
yes,
done with
yes.
the collection.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right. So we have an informal interaction section with it for the minute. So we were all interested. I request them coming forward. So you didn't have to use the mic and just chat here. Yeah, welcome to
In a more informal setting where you want to just ask frank questions about career options, please stay back and you can ask. Don't shy away. Just it's your opportunity to know your options.